Welcome to the Virtual Excellence Show, where we speak to amazing people for their insights on how to be excellent in the world's virtual. And today we have Kristine Dery, who is research scientist at MIT's Center for Information Systems Research. So she has very pragmatic and very useful insights into how organizations can succeed in a very rapidly changing world. So wonderful to have you on the show, Kristine.
Thanks, Ross. Great to be here.
So that's a very nifty role and title, research scientist at MIT Center for Information Science Research, is it?
Information Systems Research.
Information Systems Research.
Yeah.
So tell us about CSIR and your role there.
Yeah, so this is a role, a center that was as part of the Sloan School of Management, and we have for the last 42 years studied large organizations and how they transform. Never has that been more relevant than it is today as we go into this digital world and as companies are starting to really having to significantly transform their whole business model to be relevant and to be successful in a business world. Easy to do if you're digitally born. A lot of things to change: legacy systems, legacy leadership, legacy cultures, legacy technologies and systems, if you're a large organization. So that's what we study. I'm based in Sydney, but you can see from behind me, I'm missing campus a lot at the moment. There's very exciting things happening on our campus, albeit in a very restricted way in terms of access. But buildings like this have really inspired me as I've done my research. This is the Frank Gehry building, known as the Starter building. But it started life as Building 20, and if I may, I'll just sort of share with you a story, because this has inspired my research into understanding new ways of working and how people work to be more creative, more innovative, more relevant to the world that they're in. Building 20, that did not look like this. It was a building designed in World War II to house physicists coming from all around the country to solve one key problem. And that was to take a small startup product called radar and see if they could use it at scale in the war to solve a major problem, which was trying to find submarines, essentially. So they brought all of these physicists together in this building that was built of asbestos, and anything that they could find during wartime was a temporary 3-story building. And they worked together for 2 years and they solved this problem. And they essentially said that they took a problem that would have typically taken around 27 to 30 man years, and they've made that into, they turned it into a 2-year project. And, the rest is history, because arguably, the war changed direction when radar, in fact, was brought in to make a big difference. Now, after the war, that building was supposed to be torn down. But all of the soldiers came back to the US and they went back onto campuses and they needed the space. So Building 20 stayed, and into that building poured all kinds of people. So the physicists stayed, but in there also came people that were researching sound. People like Noam Chomsky were in there. All kinds of people went into this building. It leaked. It was horrible. It was boiling hot in the summer, freezing cold in the winter. But 9 Nobel Prize winners came out of that building over the next 55 years. Now, what's interesting about that is that we're a high-achieving university, but that is in excess of anything else that was coming out of anywhere else on the campus. So the question for me was always, what was the magic source of Building 20? Was it the building itself? And in fact, the brief that Frank Gehry was given assumed that it was. There was something magical about this building that produced this amazing innovation and creativity. Over time, as I've studied this, what I've found is it actually had very little to do with the building. They were cutting holes in it and they did have freedom to make the space anything that they wanted to make it. But in essence, what was going on in here was this thing that I call improvisation. People were very clear about the problems that they were solving, but then they were able to work within that framework. I think about improvisation as freedom in a framework. They were able to work within that framework across teams with different sorts of people to figure out these problems and to be much more creative in their solutions. When Building 20 was disbanded and this building was erected, which is my favorite building on campus of all time, it is absolutely beautiful. It really only had two things in common with Building 20. One was that it leaked, and two was that all kinds of people went to work in this building from all around campus in different ways, but they didn't achieve the 9 Nobel Prize winners that came out of Building 20. They achieved at the same rate and the same level as everywhere else on campus. So it was really the ways of behaving, this, what I call improvisation, ways of thinking that enable people to apply the disciplines and work within these frameworks to do amazing things.
That's a fabulous story. So I, deep believer in the power of improvisation, sort of early on came across the book Impro by Keith Johnson, who founded Theatre Sports, and played around with that. And I think that's the way to let ourselves out as individuals, but I think arguably also the same for organizations. So this year we have seen organizations forced to not be what they were in the past, because that doesn't necessarily work, but have to become anew. So what have you seen this year in terms of organizations being able to change and adapt and respond to such a different environment today?
So what we've seen is that the conversation started off about being where people were going to work. And I think for some companies, in fact, they're still locked into a lot of that conversation. Should we work from home? Should we come back to the office? Should we have some sort of hybrid in this? What we've seen is that companies that are really able to leverage what they've learned over this time and reimagine what they might look like going forward are thinking about this future-ready workforce and making big investments in two sets of capabilities. The first is the digitization of work, moving from being in a space where we're just automating work, automating existing ways of doing things and applying vendor-based software and learning how to use those more effectively, to a place where we're componentizing work in ways where it can be reconfigurable, where we can pull it apart, where we can take components, small components of it, and put it together in new ways, enabling our people to be much more innovative about what the way work is being designed, who's going to do it, and how we're going to execute on the work in order to deliver better and better customer service or customer experience. On the other side, though, it's not enough just to have the technology. We need to have what I call digital fitness. And this is this idea where we move from rote learning or repetitive learning that just enables us to get better and better at using the systems or better and better at what we do, to this space called improvisation, which is freedom in a framework. This is not a free-for-all. This is really understanding the accountabilities, really having firm boundaries around what it is that we're trying to achieve here, what the vision is and where these teams or individuals fit into that. But then enabling the freedom by building these deep-seated skills and then enabling people to work really effectively in these cross-disciplinary teams to solve problems in new ways. And that's the new world of digital. It's less about skills and matching skills to jobs, and it's much more about building this really strong muscle around complex problem solving.
Yeah, the theme of what you refer to as componentization, I often talk about the modularization, breaking down the organization into value creation more generally, not just within organizations, but across organizational boundaries. Bring it down into modules, so from web services 20 years ago to various other manifestations of technologies to allow that modularization. But I suppose two things come from that. One is it gives you the ability to play and to improvise, but then there is the culture of how people do play or in various ways. And I suppose also this issue of governance, in the sense, okay, you've got this idea of a sandbox where you can play, but you don't necessarily go outside because you might break something. So I'd love to hear your reflections on that idea of this allowing to play, but what's the role of people versus technology, and also what is the what governance, I suppose, guides this or enables this rather than stymies it.
Yeah, and I think this is the key to understanding how we build this digital level of digital fitness, is being very clear about the accountabilities and the decision rights that people have within our organization, but then building the muscle to be able to work within those boundaries to be more creative and more innovative and solve problems in unexpected ways. If you think about it like in music, for example, if you're at the rote learning end of that digital fitness scale, then somebody gives you the score. You've already got all the rules about how to play the score as determined by the composer, and you set about getting better and better at doing that. As you develop further, you then take that music and you play it in an ensemble of some kind. So now you have to start playing with team members, and you have to start listening to what they're doing, understanding their strengths and weaknesses, understanding how they interpret the score, and then reinterpreting how you play it with an ensemble. But you're building and building these strengths of skills as you go along, and as you participate in the whole process of playing in this ensemble. When we get to the improvisation level, then we're able to take the deep-seated skills that we've learned, the listening that we've acquired. We understand very clearly the rules of the game, the direction, what we're trying to achieve at the end. But now we're able to really play very differently to achieve unexpected outcomes. The outcomes are not determined, just the boundaries within which the outcomes need to be delivered. And I think that's the difference. And what we're seeing in some of these organizations that have really moved into this improvisation space is that they operate very differently in terms of how they reward people, how they communicate the vision of the organization on a regular basis to these teams, and make sure that that is able to be put into practice at a team and individual level, so it's not just a high-powered series of motherhood statements. And they really are focused on this rapid learning component, so ensuring that their people are motivated and inspired to learn. So you start to see things like curiosity indexes and rewards based not on the different little badges that you learn in terms of the skills that you acquire, but much more about how you might be applying those badges to new problems in the organization, or how you're teaching others about the skills that you've learned. So this is a very different way of thinking about how we motivate, inspire, and lead our people.
There's a lot I'd like to dig into there, but perhaps first, can you give an example of an organization which is improvising and being able to use that to adapt to changing world?
Yeah, one of the stories that's really inspired me this year, I think, is the story of CarMax in the US. And for those of you who don't know that organization, they are the largest used car sales company in the US. In fact, they are bigger than number 2, 3, 4, and 5 put together. So they are an extremely large organization. They've grown to be a very different looking company over the last 10 or so years. And they've moved from being very much a face-to-face type organization, selling out of car yards, the traditional way of both B2C and also B2B, because they have a wholesale business as well. They've moved from there to being an omnichannel digital organization, which means you as the customer can engage with them in any way you like across any channel, whether it's in the digital channel or whether it's face-to-face at the car yard. But you can engage with them in different ways. So it doesn't matter what part of the process you're at, you can choose whatever channel suits you at the time. And what's interesting about that is if you're truly going to deliver an omni-channel business, your employees also have to be able to connect with the customer at whatever stage they're at. So they don't want to have to go back and explain any of that to you. In order to deliver that for employees, they've really had to think very hard about how they digitize work, how they break work into these components so that they can put it together in whatever shape it needs to be in order to keep changing with the changing needs of customers. So they have really put a lot of effort into employee-facing technologies, not just purely for the employee and the things that they do, but also as part of the whole customer experience journey. So that's the first thing that they've done. But in order to really open up those and unlock those capabilities of the technologies and enable people to work very differently, they've had to build this digital fitness model. And that's been about moving people around into different teams, enabling them to learn and grow beyond the role that they're typically in. So moving them sideways across the organization in and out of different teams. They have a series of innovation spaces that they allow people to move in and out of and play and learn. They reward people very differently, which is a lot more connected to how they're applying their new skills to new innovation and new creativity within the organization. And they're also very connected to their people. So regular stand-ups where the senior executives are there together with that the organization is going in, making sure they understand the framework that they're working within and they're hitting the targets that they need to hit, but then helping them to be able to work much more creatively within those frames. Now that requires very, very regular checkups with senior executives. That happens weekly at CarMax. They're very transparent about helping each other and sharing knowledge across these teams. Their focus is on their talent and how they develop their talent. So they have people who work across the teams who are making sure that the frameworks are in place and that people keep to their schedules and keep to their deliverables. And that frees up the leaders of the team to focus on the talent, the skills, and the way in which those teams are learning. So they've got some really specific activities in place that help them both move towards an improvisation model and also keep digitizing the work and the way work is done.
And I gather this year has been a successful year for them despite the challenges.
You know, it's been incredible, Ross. They have turned their business model literally on a dime. And they went from having all of their retail operations closed down. They then had to move into a virtual model, but they're selling cars. People want to see these cars. They want to drive these cars. They can do so much online, but then, this is a big purchase for most people. So they went to a home delivery model where they were able to shift employees into a very different way of being able to connect with their customers and work with them in order to maintain the volume of sales. And while they had a dip like most people had at the beginning of the crisis, they've come back very strong at the end, and their results are right up to their pre-COVID levels. But the big point is that they were able to adjust the technologies that their people were working with very quickly because of this componentized way of being able to put components together in different ways. And they were able to build the learning that enabled their people to shift into this new business model.
I think it's really interesting, this, I suppose, the twin themes of improvisation and learning. And actually that reminds me of the Zen masters who practiced diligently for 20 years and then they not suddenly, but to the point where they can just let it flow. And I suppose at the same time, to build this improvisation, and just inevitably in a fast-changing world, we need to build learning. We need to learn as individuals, building organizational learning. So I'm intrigued by some of the things you were saying before about these badges for learning, but also around how organizations can, if this is an outcome, if learning is an outcome which inevitably leads to or organizational success, how can you measure that? How can you support that? How can you create those learning environments in ways that actually make sense for individuals?
Yeah, so I think in the past, in more traditional business models, we tend to focus on the inputs. So we measure specific skills that people have, and then we match them to their roles, and then we decide, who can move within our organization based often on the skills that they've built up over time, or the way in which we believe that they're able to pick up new skills and learn them. But it's very much an input model. This is an output model where we're much more interested in how you apply those skills in different ways. So that means we hire people differently. DBS in Singapore, the world's has been given the accolade of the world's best digital bank now 3 years in a row. They hack to hire. So they're using hackathons now to hire, which means they're much more interested in your problem-solving abilities rather than, the badges of the skills you have. They can teach you that. What they're much more interested in is how you can apply those and learn very quickly. Another company I studied in India, LTI, they have a philosophy that underpins everything that they do in learning called Shoshin. And Shoshin in essence means, as they described it to me, it's being nosy. And I said, was it being curious? And they said, no, it's so much more than that. It's being about giving people a license to say, you know what, I think I could help you do that better than the way we're doing it at the moment. I think that there's something about what you're doing over here that I'm doing here, and I could help you do that better. And at the same time, being open to being a recipient of that kind of learning as well. So it's rapid learning. It's about being able to think more broadly than just your own specific team or your own specific area of the business, and then work across teams to solve really complex problems, and that being the fundamental philosophy behind the organization.
That's great. So if we come back to this idea of leader of organization, I suppose hopefully some are already feeling quite nimble or having demonstrated that recently, others not to the extent that they want. So as a leader, what are the things which you start with? How do you create a program to say, all right, let's become a more improvisational organization where we have the foundations to enable that so that we can adapt to a rapidly changing world. We can respond if next year is quite different than this year, which it very likely will be. So where do you start?
Yeah. So this is the question that I'm trying to grapple with at the moment. What does it feel like to be in one of these organizations? And what does it feel like as a leader? And what I'm finding interesting about that is the first thing is these leaders become very good at clarifying the vision and then translating that vision down to the level of the teams that are working on these problems. So that's one of the skills that they become very good at doing. The other thing that they become incredibly good at doing is they're much more effective communicators. Now, what do I mean by that is that they're not just checking up to see how their people are going, but they're really working to understand what it is that they need to do to enable their people to work in this more improvisational way. And that means listening, getting rid of the speed bumps that I've talked about, hearing what those speed bumps are and being able to interpret that in ways that really enable their people to be much more effective. And I guess the other third thing that we're seeing is beyond communicating the vision, really understanding and listening to their teams and connecting with them much more to get rid of these speed bumps. The third thing is data. The more you digitize work, the more data is available to you to be able to really understand the challenges of your people in very different ways. And that doesn't mean to say we hide behind the data and just act according to what the numbers are telling us. It means that we're able to put data together in different combinations to understand new opportunities, to really be able to have much more informed conversation with our people, and then to be able to leverage off that data to benchmark or create dashboards so that we can see progress and get better metrics in place to understand how well we are moving towards being more improvisational and more configurable in the technology itself.
Yes, well, that's the challenge which all leaders are facing. So I think, this Virtual Excellence Show. We're looking at the world of virtual, which I think is location independent. So I think that's, I suppose, implicit to a large degree in what we've been talking about, and that many organizations have been significantly forced to be virtual this year. But were there any comments in particular around the shift to virtualized organizations, which has de facto happened or is in process, and how organizations can optimize that shift into more virtual work?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a case of how we define the problem. And if we define the problem around just being where work is done, then we're going to be having a conversation around, do we have our people working from home or do we have our people working in the office, or some hybrid of the two, and what does that mean? And that's the kind of conversation we'll have. But if instead we're saying, what does our future-ready workforce look like? What are the things that our people are going to need in order to make them more effective? And one of those things could be a lot more flexibility around where work is done. But it could equally be around changing the nature of the physical space to bring some people back to work. But the issue is here that where work is done is just part of the challenge. And if we don't integrate that into a bigger discussion around what kind of skills do we need, what kind of capabilities do we need to build in our workforce, and what sort of digital capabilities do we need to put in place so that we get to have some of those options, then we're going to miss a huge opportunity here. And that's where I'm seeing that companies that were more mature in their shift to a digital world and their move to a digital business model, like CarMax, like DBS, LTI, others, they very quickly moved out of the place to say, well, where work is going to be done. They moved very fast to this place of saying, how do we make sure we now leverage these opportunities that we've just built? We've now shifted our digitization of work much faster and harder than we ever thought before. We've been able to accelerate a lot of programs around that. These companies are moving faster along that digitization. They're not slowing down as a result of just getting people connected. They're really speeding that up. And they're also saying, how do we now accelerate some of those learning opportunities, and how do we create this process of rapid learning to deliver on this digital fitness? Because that's going to give us the choices around talent and around who's going to do the work and how it's going to be done and where it's going to be done in very different ways.
Absolutely, in the sense so that more choices is better than less choices. Yeah. And if you're able to do that, then you can improvise and learn, outperform and succeed as other organizations can't. Exactly.
It's creating options, and the future-ready workforce is one that is resilient, that really understands the capabilities around digital and is able to work in these teams in very different ways to be able to deliver more value, but also that really is connected to the vision for the organization moving forward. So those are the things that become incredibly important to be able to implement. Now, they sound easy, but they're actually not. And the coordination between the digitization of work and the digital fitness, getting the coordination between those axes right, we see that really creates enormous business value for companies. They get better at cross-selling, they get better at data monetization, they get better at innovation, they get much better at delivering consistent customer excellence and being able to reimagine and keep building and moving forward on customer excellence. And then we see massive impact to the bottom line. Not only are they driving new revenue streams, which is what you'd expect, but they're able to do that at a significantly reduced cost. So this really does matter. Getting this right really matters. It's complex. It takes time. Organizations need to learn, they need to invest, and they need to grow. But it really delivers value in so many different ways for companies in a digital world.
Well, it's fantastic to get insights from what's obviously very deep and broad global research from MIT's Center for Information Systems Research. So thank you so much for sharing your insights with the Virtual Excellence Show audience, Kristine. Wonderful to have you on the show.
Thank you, Ross. Thank you so much for having me. Go safely, everybody. And because I've just spent 9 months in New Zealand, and this is the New Zealand government's mantra around this, is just be kind. These are tough times for all of our people, and I think right now is the time to be kinder and more empathetic than we've ever been before.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Ross. Take care.
So that was Kristine Dery sharing some deep research-based insights into improvisation as a way organizations can build learning and success. So if you've liked the show, please like it on YouTube and subscribe to the channel if you'd like to hear more from other extraordinary people in sharing excellence in a virtual world.